Yeah, there we go. All right. Welcome to the Green Organic Garden Podcast. It is Friday, June 26, 2020. And Patti Armbrister talked me into doing a video live. So here we are doing video, but she's going to do some screen share and I'm going to turn it over to her so she can tell us all her amazing golden seeds. So welcome to the show, Patti. Welcome back to the show, Patti.
Well, yes, thank you, Jackie. I'm just elated that we are going to get to have a conversation again and share with whomever will be willing to listen to us. And so super exciting.
Well, cool. Well, you always have tons of awesome stuff to share. And listeners know I posted about you coming to visit. I haven't posted the advice you gave me, but I talked about it maybe I recorded it. It was when we met with Robin in Whitefish. Actually, I recorded it on the way home. So I haven't done an episode about you coming to visit. So I guess listeners, you'll hear that soon.
Yeah, that'll be good.
But in the meantime, what are we going to talk about today?
Oh, we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff.
Awesome.
For one thing, here in Eastern Montana, it is like the most phenomenal growing season you've ever seen or I've ever seen. And I've been here since 1990 to give you an idea and every single season's been different, right? But this spring has just been unbelievable. The plants can't ask for anything more than what they've received this year. So they're just looking amazing and producing. So yeah, I'm pretty excited that I've been able to eat kale out of my garden for the last month. And previous to that, I was eating it out of the passive solar greenhouse at the school. And so my goal is to eat kale year-round, grown in Montana. So that's what I want to be doing. So I'm getting closer and closer to it. I'm just keep trying to tweak it, figure out when do I need to plant it, where does it need to be in the wintertime, and how to get it done. But we're getting really close. I had a plant at the school garden in the passive solar this year. And that plant, I was harvesting it in March. Yeah. And little kids and I planted it in September.
I was just going to say that. When did you plant it if you were eating it in March?
Right, in September. And so I planted it as a seedling, and then they transplanted it into these containers, which we tried 5 different varieties when we did that. And we only had the one variety make it all the way through and be where that I could harvest it. I do have another variety, which is the Red Russian, that is still producing right now, but I wasn't able to harvest it for the 3 or 4 months that I was harvesting this curly kale that is more of a cold hardy kale. So the ones with the real crinkly leaves, not the dinosaur kale, but the real crinkly leaves are, and they're kind of thicker celled plants. So they really, it's done really well. Now it's producing seeds. So I'll be collecting seeds, hopefully sharing them down the road with the good seed company. So.
Awesome. So I found we planted arugula seeds with my students on March 2nd because it was right before school. We had to go home, and I did send them home with the kids. And those arugula seeds that I took home that I planted in a container didn't really grow any faster that whole time to the ones that I ended up putting in the ground outside, and then those ones took off. They both I just felt like maybe it was too soon or trying to plant them in the container. I don't know what I did wrong. They didn't do very well.
Sometimes it's just timing, and sometimes it's the depth of the container. These are in a pot that's probably 20 inches deep. These kale were. So it was kind of mimicking, and we planted other plants in with them. So in the beginning, it was a poly planting, which I promote, right? Diversity all the way around, as much diversity as you can put in. And so they had diversity through the fall, but then when it got really cold, those guys got fall out of the system. But yeah, it makes a big difference. I think that the plants really know how many daylight hours is going on out there, and so they're triggered by that. They're doing all kinds of communication that we have just barely starting to learn a little bit about. And so that's what I've been honing in on, especially when it comes to some of the pests in the garden. Like, for example, our favorite friends are slugs, which I've been really working on dramatically the last couple of years to try to figure out how do we live with them, because they are one of the key decomposers, right? So it isn't like we want to annihilate them. What I want to do is figure out how I can get in balance to live with them. And so anything that finishes out its life cycle in the soil, which they do, I think can be controlled in the soil. So that's where I've been attacking them, along with our flea beetles. Our favorite friends are flea beetles, but attacking them with beneficial nematodes. And so my population of slugs this year is like hardly nothing compared to what it was a year ago at this time. And so I know I'm gaining, but I'm going at it in multiple ways, not just the nematodes, but the nematodes I think are really helping to keep the population reduced. So, and those plants, so, you know, you'll have one plant right side by side of another, and one plant is viciously getting attacked, and it looks fine. It doesn't look any different than the one next to it. The one next to it is not getting attacked. And so that plant that's getting ate is sending out signals to come eat me. And so we got to figure out, okay, how do we get this plant to be happier or healthier, which I think a lot of times it's healthier, to not send those signals? Because if it sends those signals, it doesn't matter what I do, I'm not going to be able to stop the attack. And so I've been trying to use, like I'll break the lower leaves off of, especially cabbages. They just love cabbage. So break the lower leaves off the cabbages, especially the ones that are touching the ground. They're already getting hammered anyhow by either slugs or other pests. And so then I'll lay them in a little pile. The second those plants are not attached to the plant, they're sending signals too, usually through chemical signals, that they need ate and decompose. And so decomposers come in, which is the slug is going to be the first responder. And so they're going to go get on those leaves. So I just take a bucket with a little bit of water in it, take those leaves and dunk them into the bucket. And for some reason in nature or God did not allow a slug to swim, right? Most every creature on earth swims, but not a slug. They cannot do that. So it's a quick, easy way to get rid of them. They're dead. There would be a few try to crawl out of the bucket. I just give them a good little swirl and they're out of there. And so that's been working really well, versus, you know, hand picking them or whatever. But so, yeah.
Well, awesome, because that's one of the biggest questions I get repeatedly is, what do I do about bugs and pests? And slugs are like at the top of one of those lists. Like I hear a lot of people ask about slugs.
Yep. And so I think planting a lot of diversity really helps. Like I have kale planted kind of in pods right now, where there's 3 and 4, maybe 5 plants together, for the cabbages, kale, beets, stuff like that. So that I've got other plants in there amongst them, flowering plants. I've noticed that none of the slugs like anything to do with the garlic or onions, and they seem to stay away from those beds better than the others. And so I think figuring out some combinations of what to be planting is going to be helpful for gardeners, instead of when we plant one straight row of something and that plant sending a signal for the pests to come in, there's nothing a gardener is going to be able to do outside of using chemicals that actually is just a band-aid. It didn't fix the problem. It might have stopped the problem for that right then, but it's not going to solve the issue. You're just asking for it. So we got to start thinking, okay, how do we do this different? Okay, if I plant a few kale here, a few cabbages and other locations. The slugs love the radishes. So does the flea beetle. So I use the radish and the mustards as a trap crop. Plant them far away from where you want to put your key cabbages and kale. I haven't noticed them on a kohlrabi, which is funny because they're kind of the same family, but anyhow, plant that trap crop way away from them, which you draw those pests to those other plants, especially if you water. If you're going to water overhead, you water your trap crop overhead. Do not water the rest of the plants overhead. That's going to really pull the slugs over in that direction because they just love a damp, wet environment, even though they can't swim. So that will pull them that way, though, and away from your target crop. But I just really think a lot of gardeners need to get to the 3-year mark with their no-till and regenerative practices, because when you do, it's like the tipping point. When you get to that point, your plants are so healthy and so strong and sending out positive signals, and they have a defenses of microbes all around them that you don't have any pests then. And so we got to get to that point. And so a lot of people maybe, like for instance, I had a gardener that was going on the no-till. They were going pretty good. They were in a year and a half of no-till. And something went wrong with their clover winter killed. So they had clover in their walkways. And so they decided to till it instead of just reseed it. And when they did, they just opened up the box to start over again, because now the flea beetles have come in and just literally wiped out their whole garden, even green beans and all, because they had disturbed the predator that was going to eat the flea beetles' eggs in the soil. So when we till or disturb that soil, we're killing out beneficials that would have helped us with most of these pests, that if they live out their life cycle in the soil. So that would be our slugs and our flea beetles, which are our 2 biggest enemies in Montana that I've discovered for gardeners, is those. So if we can not disturb that soil and figure out ways that we can do it. Like I've been buying these nematodes, right? I'm creating nematodes in my compost, but I buy these nematodes that are beneficial nematodes online that will eat flea beetle eggs, right? So that's what I've been doing. And then I go ahead and put them out twice a year, because your flea beetles have 2 life cycles in one growing season. A lot of people don't understand that either. So they go through a small one in the beginning, then when they go lay their eggs in the soil, they lay massive amounts of eggs, and then they reproduce. Now you have massive numbers of flea beetles come late July or August from that first hatch. So if we can have the nematodes in the soil in the spring, early in the spring, to keep those numbers somewhat in control, and then another set of nematodes put in to get that summer hatch, really will keep the numbers down. Like right now, I have flea beetles in my garden, but you couldn't detect it by looking at any plants. You'd have to almost just really, really look for a flea beetle to find a flea beetle in my garden right now. So to give you an idea, here I can show you a picture. Maybe we'll try this.
Cool. Well, I'll tell you, I scored a billboard tarp from, like, they were taking this billboard down on the side of the highway, and I just pulled over and was like, hey, what are you doing with that? And the guys gave it to me. And Mike did half of the mini farm in tarps this year, and it was so amazing how good that worked.
And so you were doing it to suffocate out the plants that you solarized?
He did it to like for the places like where he was going to plant the green beans that can't go in after frost. Like usually that area would be just covered in weeds, and it would just be like this huge ordeal, like, you know, everything else that's growing from March till June, but then he couldn't put the green beans in, which this year, I don't know if you put him in at the 1st of June. It seemed early, like maybe even the last week of May, but whatever, to just be able to pull those tarps off and not have to hardly do anything. Like he maybe turned it over the broad fork a little, but just like to not have anything growing in there from last winter. Like usually in the spring, it would just be covered in weeds that he would end up having to dig up. So
right.
I thought that worked awesome this year.
Yeah, and that works really, really well for both market gardens and small gardens. If a small gardener knows, okay, I'm having grass that invade in this garden or whatever, man, get it tarped. And I like to tarp it when that grass is still growing, right? So if you tarp it in the fall, but when the plant's still doing photosynthesis, it's still trying to grow up above and gather sunlight. And so you tarp it then, it's going to really knock things back really, really hard.
Nice.
So, yeah, it's a good idea. So I don't know, can you see?
Is that your kale?
This is some of the kale, kohlrabi, and broccoli. And then, of course, it's interplanted with Phacelia, which is called bee friend, is its nickname, and the bees just love it. And then in the way background, there's a peony back there. But on the fence is a Honeycrisp apple that I'm going to be training to go flat across that fence, so it won't be taking sunlight up from these beds. But this bed is a 4 foot by 16 bed, and it's got a whole row of celery on the back side of it. And it's already produced a lot of food, and it doesn't have any pests, no pests of any kind whatsoever going on
It
in
looks
there. Because
super healthy.
Yeah, because of the diversity and you know, people think, and you know, all of my lifetime of up until the last 10 years, I was always taught, and my grandparents, parents, myself, always thought, okay, the plants are competing, that I need to have just broccoli here or just kale here. But that's just really false. That is so far from true. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the plants are helping each other. And the more diverse of plants you have, the more they help each other. They're not only helping each other with pests, but they're helping each other with nutrients and water. And so they're sharing through the roots and the fungi, and it's in the organic matter, that it's just amazing. And so, yeah, I can't stress that enough, that we need to be planting diversity. Let's see, what else we got here? So this is another, sorry for the sunlight. I took these right before we got on the computer here, but I have some perennial plants in here. This is perennial grasses. There's 2 different kinds of grasses there in front of the screen. One is our blue bunch wheatgrass, which is our state grass. Just awesome grass, but really getting to be hard to find out on the range because we've overgrazed it. And the next grass to it, the taller one, is actually a native grass too, and it's basin ryegrass. And so both grasses are benefiting the bees. The bees spend quite a bit of time in grass, which I don't know exactly why, but I think they do go after the pollen when the flowers are blooming. We don't always
I
know.
was just out in the mini farm with Mike this morning and walked by this like Timothy that was as tall as me. And when I walked by, it was like a wave of smoke almost, or something. Like the pollen was just so thick. I was like, what was that?
Yep. The grasses are being very happy right now. But they also are a perennial plant. So they're putting out root exudates, which feed the soil microbes. And so the more photosynthesis this plant can do, the more food there is going into the soil to feed the soil food web. And so it just makes an incredible positive circle, you know. And if I'd seen this picture when I was young, I would have thought, oh, those grasses are taking up all the energy and all the water. But that's not true. That's not true. And these are bunch grasses. It's very important that you put bunch grasses in your garden. Don't put rhinomous ones that are going to trail with their root system. Those are the ones that are our enemies and we're trying to fight out. We don't want those kind. Those would be smooth brome and western wheatgrass and our favorite friend crabgrass. Those plants, those grasses, you definitely don't want in a garden. Nor do you want crested wheatgrass. But these 2 grasses, and I've got a few other bunch grass that are native that I get at the Native Plant Center there in Whitefish, that are fantastic. And they make a nice screen too. I'm trying to make it look like there's different rooms. And so I got a couple of these basin ryegrasses over there beyond that first trellis that kind of make a compartment. So it kind of changes what's behind the door, you know. So when we give a garden tour, it's going to look pretty cool.
Cool. What a great idea. Is that a sunflower right in the middle?
Yes, that is a sunflower. And I plant branching sunflowers because they give you know, a lot more flowers.
blooms.
And as we pick them, it's kind of pick and come, so that we get more and more flowers off of them. But each sunflower is however many seeds is in that sunflower. Those are all flowerets. So each one of those need to be pollinated. And there's literally hundreds of pollinators on a sunflower that we can hardly even see without a microscope, or at least a handheld one, to see, oh my gosh, there's all kinds of life inside the head of this sunflower. And so when you just plant branching sunflowers, you're given all kinds of insects a place to live that wouldn't be there without that flower. So yeah, I've got them kind of stationed around the yard. This is on my the east side of my yard, which is the majority of my yard. But on my north and west side of the yard is extremely hot and brutal hot and dry compared to the rest of my yard. And so I planted branching sunflowers in groups of 2 and 3 to create sunscreens for other plants. So all the way through that west side of the garden, there's these different little breaks of sunflowers that will help the plants to the east from that west sun of coming in there and just beating those plants to death and drying out the soil and everything else. So those sunflowers really help with that. They help.
Is that
with
your afternoon sun that's so hot in on the west side?
Yep, the afternoon sun. And you know, on the seed packet where it says full sun,
yeah,
people think that means full sun. It really means that plant needs 8 hours of sun a day. And so unfortunately on this west side of my house, they're getting full sun all but about 2 hours of the day.
and in Montana, on June 26th, which is like the fourth day, you know, we were just on the longest day of the year. That means it's like sunny out for 12 hours or more than that, maybe even 16 hours or something.
Exactly.
Crazy.
And it's just literally,
16,
it's too much. And so those plants, some of those plants, depending on what the plant is over there, will start to look like they're wilting in the afternoon. They're not wilting for water. They're just shutting down to cool off and to save themselves. So a lot of gardeners will go out there and water when the plant does that. And that is really almost the last thing you should ever think about doing, is those plants are taking care of their own self, and the last thing they need is water. They just need some time. And if you could give them a little bit of shade, it would really help them out a lot. And so this garden has only been watered twice this year. Now, granted,
and the rest of it's just rainwater, just
rainwater.
Yeah, we have had a lot of rain in Montana this year. A lot of nice
rains. But what's happened is that I'm 5-6 years into this no dig garden in this part of the garden. And the organic matter is, I sent a test in this year, which I've never done before. I sent a test in, and it was 5.6 organic matter in this garden.
Nice.
So yeah, so it's like a sponge. It is holding moisture. So I bought a moisture meter. You just it's a probe you just stick in the ground. And so I'm relying on that to tell me if I need to water or not. Because even my flower pots, I'll stick that meter in, because I do deep watering when I water. So I give everything a really good watering when I do water. And so I stick that meter in for at least a week. I don't have to water, even in a 24-inch pots. I'm not having to water, because I deep watered, and we just seem to surface water. So when we surface water, we're causing surface roots, and we're also causing that plant to be reliant on us to give it a little shot of water every day. And so when you don't do that and you deep water, right? If I was to dig a hole in this garden, I would find moisture all the way down. And then when I do water, I water for a couple hours, where it's going to get an inch or more of rain or sprinkler or whatever. Make sure that much water goes down so that you've got deep water. So that's causing these roots of these plants to go super deep in the ground instead of being shallow, puny rooted. So my theory is I want this garden to work for me and not me work for it. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And so far it's working well. Of course, it is all mulch too, right? That's one of the principles of regenerative agriculture is mulching. And so everything is mulched.
What are you mulching with?
Different stuff. This 4-bed got a wood mulch, which I'm not going to do that again. It was a mulch that I got from a guy that he's been making compost, but it's super fine, and it
does that make it like blow away in the wind?
It doesn't blow, but it also repels water, so that soils and wood can get hydrophobic. Hydro meaning water-phobic, scared. So it's actually a waxy coat that the bacteria have put on the plant material, organic material, or soil to hold themselves in place. And so when it gets hydrophobic, it just repels all water, and you can't get water to go in. And it takes several waterings to get the water to start going in. And so I don't like that at all. So this bed, that's very front one that we can see, those are carrots in there. I'll be taking some of that material back off this fall and putting my own compost back on. And then I'll mulch it with alfalfa hay. So I like alfalfa hay because most farmers are trying to harvest alfalfa hay for high protein. So they're cutting it when it's in early bud stage and has lots of leaves on it. And so super high protein. It's got a lot of nutrients in that hay. You know, in fact, humans take alfalfa for vitamins. We don't even know it, but a lot of vitamins we consume have alfalfa in it. And so alfalfa is fantastic for the garden. And so I've been mulching with that. And most all these beds had alfalfa on them during the winter.
I think Mike's been putting like alfalfa meal, like in the, like when he digs the hole to put the tomato plant or the eggplant or whatever he's planting, like in the ground, he puts like a little scoop of alfalfa meal to boost the nitrogen, maybe, or I don't know.
Yep, nitrogen and your potassium both will be boosted with alfalfa. So it's a good amendment. But this is sort of like feeding the microbes for them to take those nutrients down in the soil and get them soluble and ready for plants. And so I'm letting those microbes do that converting for us. And then if there's too much mulch in the spring, then I'll pick up that hay and I'll use it around the potatoes. So the potatoes are mulched with alfalfa hay. And then as they get taller, then I'll put more of it up around the branches of the plant to make it sturdier and want to grow more leaves.
Mike was mulching his potatoes today. He's almost got that whole one side of the mini farm done.
Nice. Yeah, it's going to be a good year for potatoes, and I've seen in every garden I've went to, there's people who've planted more than normal. It's good. We need to be waking up here. We need to respond. So that's all great that we're responding. Here's another view of, this is from west looking back to the southeast. And those are grapes. There's 3 plants there, and it's on a cattle panel trellis. That was a 16-foot panel, and then we bent it. My son and I bent it into this arch, and he drove steel stakes in the ground for it. And so this is King of the North, and it is just loaded with grapes every single year. And yeah, it's super happy this year.
So does that take a lot of water? Like we have grapes that Mike tried to grow grapes over that, like where we were sitting. And just, they've never really, I feel like we just don't water them enough. And I don't know, it just hasn't worked right.
Well, I don't.
It's like amazing. And that's, you just took that picture this morning?
Yeah, I took this morning. Well, right before 11 o'clock.
Do you do the deep water? Wait, what'd you say? You don't water?
I only do deep watering. But I'm giving everything in the whole garden. I'll give them some worm castings and some homemade compost and some kelp and fish emulsions if they need nitrogen, right? So a lot of my plants right now aren't showing any nitrogen need, so there's no reason to put the fish in then. But if they do need nitrogen, which early in the spring I do, right? Soils are cold, nitrogen hasn't gotten where it's soluble with the plants yet, so you do need it then. Early in the spring, you'd always put the fish in. But this time of year, I'm not needing to put the fish in. And so I use that, I just put it on with a watering can, because you can backpack or spray it on, but I have trouble with it always plugging up because my composts have a lot of nematodes in it. And so, and microarthropods, all kinds of really cool stuff. So it's easier to just drench it on. So I just been using a water can. So that means that these leaves haven't been getting it, but they'd probably be better off if I did put it on leaves too. But I'm drenching it on the soil in the lower part of the plants and stuff when I put it on. And I do that once a week. So
The fish emulsion?
no,
Wait, did I miss something?
the worm castings.
Oh, the worm castings,
in the
right.
kelp.
Sorry.
Yep. And then I use the fish if the plants show nitrogen, right? So
Okay,
if the
right.
plants are being stunted or if they've got any yellowing to their leaves, then I give them fish. Or early in the spring. You need the nitrogen early in the spring. You know, the old timers would say, oh, we're not getting any plants to grow and we need a good lightning storm. And I'm like, lightning storm? What's that got to do with plants? You know, so the lightning actually causes the bonds, the chemical bonds to break and release the nitrogen in the soil. And so, and it happens with warmer soil temperatures too. And so when your soils are cold, then you need to probably be thinking, I need to be putting some fish or alfalfa on, cottonseed meal, stuff like that, that was high protein to be able to get that nitrogen boost that those plants are needing. But the soil biology will do that for us when they get woke up too. So I've got enough biology in my soil that I don't think I'm in any need of nitrogen. But what else did I take? I took this picture. We already looked at that. These other pictures are going to go over the buffalo. So I just come back from here. This is
Look how pretty that is.
A regenerative greenhouse. And so these guys were going to put in an organic greenhouse and they couldn't get any help from the normal extensions in our area and stuff and as to how and what to do. So they met me and we got together and decided that we would do it more regeneratively. And so that means we're trying not to have any inputs, right? We made their soil on site. They had cow manure and cattails and wood chips, and we blended those together. And they have a lot, they're on a lake. They have a lot of fishermen. So I says, you get all your fishermen buddies to put fish in this pile. And so they added a lot of fish to that pile when we made our compost. And then they used that for their soil. So these beds really don't even have soil in them. We did put wood in the bottom of the planters. So like firewood and long branches in the bottom of these planters, because that's
kind of like hugelkultur.
Yeah, it's like a hugelkultur, but it's in a bed. And it works
so
like
pretty. Look at that.
Yeah, we don't have to water near as often as you would in a traditional greenhouse. They did add wiggler worms to every bed.
How tall are those? Are those like hip high or are they 2 feet high? I can't tell how tall they are.
They're just over knee high, so 24 inches maybe. Yeah, about 24 inches the beds are.
And what's growing in there? Those look like, are those blue flowers on the right or is that something else?
Yeah,
is that
they
kale?
are blue flowers. Those are borage.
It is borage.
Yep, and it was taller than my head today. I'm like, I should just take a picture of this borage plant. I mean, it was just so big and so unbelievable, but we got them in there just for the beneficials. And this is the first year we've tried to do it without buying bees. You know, in the past, they've been buying bumblebees to be able to make sure that we can get the tomatoes and cucumbers to pollinate. But this year we're going cold turkey. They planted 2 full beds to nothing but flowers. And I've got a few flowers in other beds too. But yeah, everything's getting pollinated extremely well and it's being highly productive. So Got another shot here. This is from the first year, actually, of the greenhouse running. And so this shot on the right-hand side here, I was up in the rafters trying to pick tomatoes when I decided I'm going to take a picture of this. It's the only place I've ever worked that you have to have an extension ladder to be able to harvest tomatoes and cucumbers from.
Oh, it looks so
But
lush and just like it reminds me of like walking in a botanical garden. Like I can almost smell it and just feel like
right,
the
yes, yes. And those were wave petunias, so there's only 2 plants there in that.
but look how big they are.
Yeah. And the nasturtiums, I didn't take a picture of a nasturtium, but I should have took a picture today. There was some double nasturtiums in there, and one
Oh.
plant covers the whole end of a planter without any problem. It's just unbelievable amount of flowers.
And those are such good companion plants. Like I've
Mhm.
been looking for companion plants for my strawberries and blueberries, but like every time I go to a companion plant website, they're like nasturtiums and marigolds, nasturtiums and marigolds, nasturtiums and marigolds.
Yes, and I like trailing nasturtiums, so unless I'm planting a border and don't have room for a trailing nasturtium, I plant trailing nasturtiums. And there used to be 2 varieties. I've been having trouble finding but one variety lately. And so we are going to try to start saving some seed from the ones we are growing, because some of them will trail a good 7-8 foot long trail on nasturtium. So I thought it would be really cool if we put them in a planter, but I won't do that because they would need to be watered every day. If we put one in the rafter, you know, and had it trail down, I thought that would look really cool, but it would require a lot more water, so we haven't done that. But they do sprout in a greenhouse. We run them alongside the bed. We had them go underneath some tomatoes last year, and they just reroot all along the trail. That, like, wow. And they self-seed, so we've not had to buy any. We're not going to buy any borage. The bee friend, the Phacelia, it's self-seeding. The sweet alyssum you see in the center there is self-seeding. And so as long as we don't disturb that soil, we get these plants to be back. Or if we put in too much mulch, then we'll take them out that way. But we've been trying to only put an inch or 2 of mulch in the fall or winter, you know, when they decide to close up the greenhouse.
That looks like a really sturdy greenhouse, like it's got lots of braces on it.
Yeah, they bought it used, and it is a real greenhouse. It isn't a high tunnel. It's a real greenhouse. All of those are rafters are real rafters and not just braces. And so, yeah, we can trellis those tomatoes, cucumbers. We're even trellising, and I don't know how this is going to go, but we're trellising those baby watermelon and cantaloupe on it this year too. So we'll see.
Cool.
Yeah, but I'd like to show people what
Yeah, look at those
a
giant
regenerative
kale
garden
plants.
a regenerative garden could look like. You know, that's more, it's outdoors, it's in Montana, it's in the eastern Montana,
And I love
and
the walkways. Are those clover?
those are white Dutch clover. Yeah, and this is celery in the foreground, right?
Oh. Oh my
So,
gosh, look at that.
yeah, it's as tall as a kale in some places. And then her carrots are the next bed over there, not where the flowers are, but the next one over. And yeah, so the key is not disturbing this soil and keeping a mulch on the ground.
And planting something when you take something out, right? Like not leaving things
Yes,
bare. I'm
exactly.
horrible about that.
Yes, I took
I
out
feel like it takes
spinach.
me so long to get back to my bed, like even like weeding or when
Yep.
I'm first starting a bed.
Yep. Today we're taking out some beds at Sleeping Buffalo, and the guys are going to replant carrots. And we'll continue to plant carrots in there for the next month or so, maybe even 2 months, because
Really?
we can go so long in there into the fall. And those fall carrots are going to be way sweeter than a spring carrot could ever be, because the carrots, when it starts getting cold, start storing the sugars in the root. And so that's why you shouldn't harvest your carrots, other than when you're in greenhouse and you have to. You shouldn't harvest them until it gets cold. And then they start setting sugars into the root. But yeah, so diversity doesn't matter. You know, it's really up to the gardener what they want it to look like. You almost get to be the person with the paintbrush, you know, is what do I want it to look like this year? Where do I want to put what, you know?
But you have to have such vision and such knowledge to do that. Like you and Mike can do that, but I struggle to do that.
Well, you can
I
put
just
these blue kale in anywhere, and red kale, put them in anywhere and you can't go wrong. You put them next to another flower, as those are marigolds in here in this situation, is, and next to nasturtium, wow, they look fantastic. This year in my garden, I didn't take a picture of it because the sun was wrong, but there's zucchini. I got 3 different kinds of zucchini. I'm kind of doing a test on them to see which one we like better, because I'm trying to get them to go without water, so they're not getting extra water. And then I put a trailing nasturtium in between each one of them. And oh my gosh, the trailing nasturtium hasn't even gotten big yet and already looks amazing, because it's going to trail up right out into the walkway and all around us, these summer squash. So yeah, it's pretty cool. I put some winter squash on top of the hugel bed. I didn't take a picture of that because the sun was wrong too. But on top of the hugel bed, and I'm going to train it to go up into the trees, because there's other plants out on the ground on the sides of the hugel. And so I wanted to go get its sun from the tree side. And so I'm going to be pinning some of them up into the trees as soon as they get to vining.
And you told me that we could put like winter squash in that corner of Mike's mini farm where he doesn't really have anything growing, and there's just kind of like rose bushes and stuff there.
Yes. Yep.
Because that will help the soil, right? It'll help it.
Yep.
We'll have all that organic matter to put into the soil in the fall.
Yep. And they do a lot of photosynthesis, so they're feeding the microbes too. And in a true corner where it's just a really pain in most gardens, we got a really tight corner or something, I like to put comfrey. I didn't take a picture of the comfrey plant, but I've been harvesting comfrey lately, and it's getting on where I haven't harvested. It's on up to my elbows or higher. That's just beautiful, beautiful plant. And you can't never have enough comfrey, because either you're going to use it and turn it into a cream that's going to be a healing cream. I use it all the time on my hands. I use it on my face. And its nickname's called Bone Net, where it can actually heal bones. And so it's a plant that you want to be harvesting and utilizing that way, but it's also a plant that's fantastic for the compost and for a drop and chop. So I'll cut it and take it and lay it next to any plants that need any extra nutritional help, or if they just need more mulch, and use them as a green mulch. And so I'll plant that right in these true corners. That's what's in this regenerative garden. They've got comfrey in the true corner, where I'm talking about where it comes to a real corner.
And you were saying that would be good with our apple trees down in the orchard, right?
Yes, yep.
I keep thinking we need to turn the orchard more into a food forest instead of just trees with grass.
Yeah.
Ever since you've been here, I'm like, I keep thinking, what can we do? Patty gave me all these ideas.
Yeah, winter squash, you could train to go up those trees. Yep. Yeah, but definitely pair comfrey with any fruit tree. And I did take a picture of fruit tree, but I don't think I put it on here today. Nope, this is a tomato.
That's a tomato. Look at those tomatoes. Oh my gosh, they're huge.
This was what I thought was the most productive tomato I've ever seen in my life. And we grew them the first year in that regenerative greenhouse. And we couldn't pick them fast enough. And we also didn't know what to do with them, because we couldn't get the local people to understand that this green tomato was ripe.
Oh.
These are green zebras, and they turn this lemon color in that lighter green color when they're ripe, but they're really ripe when that happens, where for a farmer's market, you'd pick them with them just starting to turn a little yellow at the bottom of the tomato, and pick them and market them then, because they're going to turn on their own really fast, but they're They're a fantastic tomato, and the pounds that these plants produce. So this year we only planted 2 of them. I put one at the Sleeping Buffalo and one at my high tunnel in my house, because we're like, okay, we know how productive they can be. And they are so fast. Like, they'll be one of the first tomatoes that has tomatoes on it.
And do they taste just like a regular red tomato, or do they taste like a green tomato, or a
They don't.
tomatillo, or what do they taste like?
They taste like a regular tomato, but they're more, it's hard to describe, but I would say more kind of minty
Ooh.
flavor to them. They definitely don't taste anything like a green tomato. They got a little zestier flavor to them than some tomatoes. You know how some tomatoes taste watery? Well, these guys don't do that. These guys have got flavor all throughout of them. But I was going to show you my apple, but I apparently didn't put it on the slide deck. So the apple, I just went in yesterday and took off all of the apples that were touching each other. So if there was a cluster of 5, then I took the 2 out that was in the middle. So I have now 3 fruit instead of 5. And
kind of like you were showing me on the pear tree.
They won't be bruising each other, and they won't knock against each other in the wind. They'll get bigger, and the tree will be healthier. And the tree now has just put its energy to these 3 fruit instead of these 5. And I'm talking about on one cluster, because this tree's full of fruit. But now that energy is just going to those 3. So I've actually dropped the production on the tree by 1/3 about. And the tree should be able to produce every single year. Instead of when it has that huge load, it's taken all these reserves from the tree and all this energy to put into that whole load of fruit, that it probably can't get all the way to ripe anyhow. So some of the last flower blooms on this tree, the apples were really little yet, you know, where the others are this big and these were little tiny. I took all of those off right away, all the little ones off, so that it didn't have to put energy into those that probably won't make it anyhow. And the tree will be healthier, the fruit will be healthier, we'll have less pests, because when we get those fruit banging together, then we're going to get some scars on there, and then that's going to invite insects into that fruit. But the discarded fruit, I gave back to the tree. I put it all around
Oh, you
where
did?
it would naturally fall off the tree. I put it on the ground, and I learned this from the guy that has the greenhouse in Three Forks down there in Montana, southern part of Montana.
Is that by Bozeman, Three Forks?
Yeah, close to Bozeman. And so he actually uses about half the fruit to feed the tree.
Wow.
And so, yeah, he's a very, very sharp guy, and just phenomenal amount of research.
And that doesn't like crawl, like bring in critters?
No, actually, he's in a closed system. So as far as bringing deer or whatever,
like squirrels or
squirrels,
birds or chipmunks.
I have squirrels in my yard, and they come to my feeders, bird feeder. They don't bother anything in the garden. In fact, I've never seen them in the garden.
We had squirrels destroy our broccoli crop one year, and I'm kind of like,
squirrels or
I don't know, squirrels or chipmunks or something. They like went in and like pooped on like every head of broccoli, took one bite and moved to the next one, and took another bite and moved to the next one, and pooped all over them, and just,
wow.
Oh, I was so bummed. Somebody suggested that maybe we were having a really bad drought year, and they were actually just like drinking the water off of in the mornings, the dew. I don't know. We haven't had as big a problem this year. We planted a lot of the broccoli closer to the house instead of in the mini farm. But it was like Mike planted me these most beautiful, delicious broccolis I've ever seen, and the squirrels just, it was so frustrating. And I just wanted to eat them and boil them anyway, because it was like they hardly took anything.
Well, you could have. You should have. I would have.
I don't know. I talked to somebody else. They were like, no, you did not want to eat that. You're good that you didn't. So I don't know.
I
I mean,
think
I
you
thought, I
boiled
was
it.
like, why would it hurt them if I boiled them? But
Yeah,
I don't
I
know.
think boiling it would have took care of it.
Maybe.
This is another year on that regenerative garden, and
Oh,
wanted to
so
really
pretty.
emphasize the pollinator planting that goes all the way around outside the garden. So there's a whole strip all the way around the garden that is for pollinators. And on their west side, where they have a lot of wind, they've got tall branching sunflowers on that side.
I see that over there.
Yeah, and so they don't only just help with the pollinators, they bring in all kinds of beetles and spiders and stuff that is going to take care of other insects and other pests, you know. So as long as you've got a place for insects to live, they pretty well take care of their own world. They just need us to give them a place and get out of their way and not disturb them and not go running through it with weed eater or whatever, you know. So
And I always feel like for people that like, because sometimes vegetable growing's hard, and if you live someplace where you have access to lots of fresh markets and you don't want to get into vegetable gardening, like a pollinator border is something you can do that will help the environment. It will help other people's gardens, and it's just so pretty. And like I get really frustrated when I go to the city and see tons of lawns and just think like, oh, imagine if there was a pollinator border here.
yes, exactly.
I think that's just so lovely. And like the first place I ever saw one was in Brooklyn at the Brooklyn Grange up on the roof.
Oh, nice.
And so, I mean, you could do one anywhere.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I had a person contact me yesterday because I'm doing this coaching business, you know, coaching gardeners and farmers and stuff. And they were a farmer and they wanted to put in a pollinator strip all the way around their couple big hay fields. And so I'm like, yeah, let's do it. The NRCS has got a program where it can really help them pay for it. And man, you can put in all kinds of edibles. I was at one the other day that the guy put a border all the way around his property, and they were border edibles of like um, American plum and elderberry, raspberries, blackberries, currants, gooseberries. That it You don't have to think that it needs to be an annual flower. It can take care of itself and do some really good things. And so, yeah, fantastic stuff. So I want to show you this, Jackie, though, so that this was my latest compost.
Ooh, look how dark that is.
Yeah, and I've noticed that they're different colors in different batches, you know, so it's just a matter of, and this is screened, so it's completely ready to go right
I
out.
was wondering about that because it kind of all, I don't want to say it looks uniform, but it looks like it's very like similar in size, all the pieces.
Right. Yeah, it went all went through a 1/2 inch hardware cloth as a screen. And then I'm going to use it in my compost extract and or tea, but I've been just extracting it. This is a tea, but you see the bag down in the bucket with the air bubbler. And so I'll put the compost in that bag and then just, I like using rainwater. If you can't use rainwater, then you can use water, just dechlorinate the water. You usually just pour the bucket and let it gas off for a few hours before you use it. Or some people even put a vitamin C tablet in the water to get rid of the chlorine. But so that you don't want the chlorine because they're going to kill the microbes. But so then put that bag down into the water and just massage that bag, and you'll just see the humic acids come off of it and it get blacker and blacker, and it's the microbes coming off of it too. And so it turns into this black, what we would call a tea. But even though a tea means that we would actually feed those microbes and increase the populations of them. We're not doing that. I'm just extracting them off my compost that I made. And then I use that as this drench out onto the beds, usually about once a week or every 2 weeks, along with my worm casting and any kelp. So your kelp's feeding your fungi, and your worm castings are just full of biology. So is this extract. So it's just putting lots more microbes out there. into the garden and down in the soil.
And you're going to go into this in more detail on July 18th when we do the composting webinar, right? And explain
Yes.
all this stuff.
Yeah.
Because like one thing I keep wondering, like after talking to Robin and talking to you, like, how do you get the worm castings out of the worm bin?
Yes. Simple things like that, right? But, so we've learned that it's best if you just think ahead, let the worm bin dry out a little bit, and then put your food on one end or in one bin, depending on the type of your worm bin is, and water where the food went. Guess what? The worms are all going to go to that food and that water, and then you can pick them up and put them into a different container or another bed or another bin, and then you have their worm castings.
Oh.
So you just put it through a screen. I'm going to make a tumbler one, but right now I've just been using hardware cloth to screen it. You're going to screen it a lot finer than I do that compost, so it'd be a 1/4 inch, but maybe even down to an 1/8 inch screen on it. And then you're screening off their bedding that's not broke down, and then you end up with just the worm castings. And of course you want to let them dry out. And so if you've let your bin dry out slowly, right, you're slowly putting those soil microbes to sleep. If you dry it out super fast, then you're just killing your microbes. So we want it to go through a slow down of drying out. So that's why you just kind of reduce the water in your bin, and then pretty soon you're not giving them any extra moisture to get those that biology to go to sleep, really, in the worm casting. And then you wake it up when you put it in your water. So you don't even need a tea bag to get the microbes out of the worm casting, because it just is going to completely dissolve into fertilizer and microbes when you put those worm castings in your water and stir it up.
Oh.
Yeah. So on your stackable bin, though, your bottom bin is full of worm castings. You just take that bin, and in your stackable situation, you don't even have to clean them. You just take them right out of there, and
we're going to learn how to make a stackable bin.
We know people buy them.
Oh.
We're not going to learn how to do that on this webinar, but on this webinar, I do plan to teach them 3 different ways to compost. One, making like really, really great compost, like we saw in my picture with the black compost that we can turn into an extract or a tea. And then just making good compost with less work, not as much turning, or maybe no turning. And then a third method that takes more time, but you just let Mother Nature do it passively. You're just kind of setting the table to make Mother Nature make you more compost. And so we're going to learn those 3 ways to do it during the webinar, because compost seems to be the key, especially for a market gardener or anybody starting out. And even for myself, I'm still adding these microbes every so often to my beds, and in the fall when the plants are breaking down and winter's getting ready to come on, then I may put 1 inch or so of compost on top of my beds before I mulch it for the winter, or just let the plant material mulch itself. I didn't clean my garden at all last year. Didn't take down the sunflowers or anything, and they started breaking down. When they did, then I just crumpled them up, put them on the walkway. So some of my walkways is mostly kale and sunflower stalks, but they're breaking down really fast because I got so many microbes in the soil. So when you have those 2 plants and they're not breaking down and they're touching the soil surface, you just don't have enough microbes. That you need to get more microbes working in your system. As they do, they're going to soften your soil. They're going to hold moisture. They're going to transfer nutrients to your plants. They're going to do all kinds of beneficial things. We just got to not destroy them. So we got to help them help us. So we don't till, and we keep a mulch on top of the soil surface. And it can be a live plant, or it can be a real mulch.
And then it actually makes it easier on you too, right?
Yes.
It's less work that you have to do. Bonus.
Exactly. Like you've seen in my pictures out there in the garden, I I don't weed. There's nothing to weed.
There's no space between stuff. It's just all beneficial
There's
stuff
no
growing.
space, and the soil's not been disturbed, and it's been mulched, right? So the weed seeds can't germinate, for one. They need sun to trigger them to germinate. So when you till, you're just throwing the triggers out there, say, have at it, start growing. And so when you are doing no-till and you're mulching, you're never getting that trigger to cause that weed seed to grow. The weed seeds are still there. I probably got just as many weed seeds as everybody else, but they're not germinating. Another thing that's going on is with communications with plants is there's nothing to communicate to that plant that it needs to grow. So it's an annual weed is getting told to grow, usually by the soil microbes or the lack of microbes in your soil, to heal the soil. So if I till, what am I going to get? Annual weeds by the millions, right? So they're going to come in. Their job is to flower and put out thousands, if not millions of seeds as fast as they can, drop their leaves and their plant material on the soil surface to start building up the microbes and the soils, preparing the soils for the next generations of plants. When people go in there and disturb it again, we've just asked for more annual weeds. If we stop disturbing it, then we go through this called plant succession, where that we go from the annual weeds to our Brachus family, so our kale and our broccoli and our radishes, they come next. So if you see mustard growing in your garden, they're part of that plant family. You're already moving in the right directions toward not having weeds when you have mustard growing. But people panic and see mustard growing and like, oh, I need to till. They go right back, they start to clock right back over it at ground zero with annual weeds again. So they're actually farming for the annual weeds. Right, if you just quit doing all that, and the mustards won't come in until year 2, sometimes year 3, depending on how bad your soils are, and if you have not got a leaf litter on the soil surface. So that's why you mulch. You want to have plant material on the surface, and then once those mustards start growing, they lay down their leaf systems. They put sulfur into the soil, make it plant available to the next generation of plants. And then we can start growing our grasses and our tomatoes and all of the plants that a gardener really wants to grow are all going to grow naturally, because that's what's getting told to grow in the system. And that's where we want to live, is in that situation. And so in that situation in my garden last year, my weed was a tree, right? So that's the next succession is our raspberries, our brambles, and our smaller trees will start growing, right? So as soon as I seen I had trees sprout in my yard or garden, I knew that I needed to go back to the soil microbes that was living with my tomatoes and my grasses. So that meant I needed to have more bacteria in my compost. So the next compost I made a bacterial compost instead of a fungal compost. And then I rebalance. So balance back. Now I'm not having any weeds in my soil and very few trees, because I keep we're trying to stay right in the sweet spot of growing vegetables with the soil microbes and the plants. And so that's what we're accomplished. And so, yeah, if I wanted to go add weeds to my compost, I'd have to go to somebody else's garden to get them.
So if you never cut, like you harvest the kale and just let what's left there, you just put like the next year you put a kale seed next to that plant, like where it was, or?
Well, I do crop rotation, right?
Oh,
so
right.
your kale and broccoli family will heal most fungal diseases. So your tomatoes have a lot of fungal problems, and so I like to follow my tomatoes with kale and that family. So The only place I don't get that accomplished very well is in the high tunnel, because I don't have that very many beds in the high tunnel, and I really, really want to be growing tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers in that high tunnel, so it makes it a little bit harder. But I will put them in for a fall succession, right underneath the tomatoes. The tomatoes are still growing, so I'll start tucking in arugula and radishes and stuff like that for the fall. I may not get to harvest them, but they're helping heal the soil if there was any fungal problems. But if I detect a fungal problem or a disease in a tomato, I take the tomato out instantaneously. Pull the whole plant, root and all, take it to the dump. Don't compost it or anything. I'll put some other plant in its place, right? Beets are great for that work because the beets will help heal the soil, and they're fast, and I can eat the greens if nothing else. So where I'm taking out stuff right now, I'm putting in beets or carrots.
Oh.
So like I'm taking out spinach right now, and then I'll put in new planting of beets. Even if the beets don't make it, I still got beet greens. I still have something growing right in the soil. I'll put in a lot of radishes. I usually wait because they tend to bolt in July. So I'll wait until the end of July, plant the radishes, and then I'll have fall radishes that I can use those to pickle them or whatever, so that I can use them throughout the winter.
You know what I learned is that you can saute them just like beets.
Yeah.
I eat a lot of radishes, but I like kind of the more purple white ones than the red ones for sauteing. I couldn't find those seeds this year as much.
The purple ones I love is called Bravo, and wow, are they fantastic. And they'll store through the whole year. I just took some out of my refrigerator now that was put in there last fall.
Yum.
Yeah, and still just as good as could be. And so I pickled it with some red ones, so it's really pretty. There's red and purple and white in the jar. So, and I'll take those pickled ones out and I'll throw them in stir fry too. Just put them in at the end and not really cook them too much. But yeah, good stuff.
Well, Patti, thanks for sharing everything with us today.
Yeah,
this wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And we'll see you on July 18th.
Right.
So everybody sign up.
Yes. And we're going to learn how to do really good compost, easy compost, and then lazy. I won't call it lazy, but let's call it where we don't have to turn it at all. Compost. So, but if anybody needs any help in the meantime, they can get a hold of me with thewisegrowerguru.com, and I do a coaching service to help people.
And it's awesome.
Yeah, it's been a crazy ride as far as you never know. I found more clients in my backyard than I have on the web for some reason. That it's crazy. The word of mouth starts going and things happen. But yeah, all kinds of things from composting to a gardener that's never ever gardened before to lots of gardeners with flea beetle problems. So, and it takes time, right? So these nematodes are not a 1-year fix. It's going to take a couple years.
Where do we order those? Are the nematodes what we're ordering? Wait, are we ordering?
Yep, nematodes, beneficial nematodes. I just put in beneficial nematodes on the web, and there'll be 2 or 3 different suppliers. You could always find them on Amazon if you wanted. But what I do is I get a package of them, and I'll split the package into 1 or 2 or 3 different components. So I'm going to put out the package at 3 different times instead of all at once. So like when a greenhouse gets them and they're putting them out, they're going to put them out. Sometimes they put them out every couple weeks to fix their problems. And so it's a maintenance thing for them, where they always are putting out fresh nematodes. So they won't put the whole package out at once. They'll just kind of scatter it out throughout the whole summer. So I do the same thing. You just store them in the refrigerator. They're usually coming as dry powder, and you mix that powder with some water. And then I dilute that with some more rainwater and then put it out in a drench can. So I'm not spraying them out. You can spray them, but I figure if I'm spraying them, I'm probably harming some of them. So I just use a watering can, drench them right out, and then water again. Like pre-water. I like to do it right after rain. And I always do it in the evening, right? Because they need time to get down into the soil. And
Oh,
they're
good to know.
sunlight sensitive. You don't want to have them out there during the sunlight. So with all the microbes, all the compost extracts, worm castings, whatever, I put them on the evening or really early in the morning. And if it is in the morning, I like to have it on a cloudier day, right? That just ensures that you're getting way more microbes living and doing what you want them to do for you than if you put them out there at 10 o'clock in the morning. You're pretty well wasted your time. So
Oh,
yeah,
good to know.
yep, make sure you're kind of doing that. And get on a routine. I just pick out a day of the week. I kind of like Wednesday. So I tend to do it on Wednesday evening, unless a perfect environmental day comes along, then I'll do them then. But yeah, or right ahead of a trip. If I got to be on the road for 3 or 4 days, then I'll put them out before I go. So yeah, let them work for you. I want to have extremely nutrient dense food. And so the harder those plants are working for you, the more nutrient density you got it. Another thing too is people don't need to worry so much. Don't stress over the flea beetles and the cabbage butterflies. You know, the broccoli is actually healthier for you because it's got holes in its leaves than if it was perfect and ready to win a beauty pageant. Because when that starts getting attacked by anything, that plant is putting up its defense system and it's getting stronger. It's putting more nutrients in its upper part of the plant, which you're going to eat, than if you just had a beauty pageant plant, right? So those holes aren't going to kill you. They might be hurting your image or something, but they're going to actually be healthier for you. So don't be afraid.
See, listeners, she knows her science. Okay, so I'm going to tell everybody once again, we're going to talk about 3 types of composting on July 18, 2020. You have to pre-register. I'll have the link in the show notes. It's going to be $37. And there will be, like, you'll be able to watch the replay because there's going to be so much information. You're never going to be able to digest it all. And like when you're like, all right, I'm going to try this compost today, you can watch that part again or whatever you need. And just, it's going to be Patti Armbrister helping you. We watch there's 45 minutes of talk and then there's questions and answers, right?
Yes, lots of questions and answers. Yes.
And your garden will thrive. And I know that anybody out there who's gardening this year, like you said, it's a booming year, but also the weeds are growing and there's tons of stuff to do. And you're going to help us make that easier.
Yeah, and remember that soil has got to breathe. So if it's been raining, you do not add water, right? The last thing you want to do is water when you had a lot of rain.
And I like that deep watering thing that you were talking about more. It's making me wonder if I'm not doing enough watering, if I'm not, maybe I should get one area more each day instead of just trying to do every area a little tiny bit.
Yeah, like I'll flood irrigate. In my high tunnel in that regenerative garden is all flood irrigated. And so every 10 days is the shortest amount of time, or the longest amount of time, I guess, between watering. Right now, I'm going on my 3rd week without having to water in the high tunnel. Right?
That's amazing.
Because
it's not getting any rain in the high tunnel, right?
It doesn't get rain, but it does. It's deep watered and it's on just a little bit of a grade. And so when it does rain, it's getting some from the outside that will gravity flow through the soil profile. But in the soil profile, we have so much organic matter and microbes working, and I'm getting ready to add biochar to it this fall. Nice. I bet next year I can probably go toward a month without having water in that high tunnel. So once you start understanding how to get that stuff working for you, you can let it work for you instead of you work for it.
I bet all those people down in California are like, that's what we need, because they sure don't, I don't think, have a lot of the rain, or at least in Southern California like we have. So
yeah.
Thank you so much, Patti.
You are more than welcome, Jackie, and I hope everybody has a fantastic season growing the healthiest food possible, and you're going to grow healthy.
And if you want Patti to do a personal consultation, just connect with her at, what is it, Wise Grower Guru?
Yep. .com.
Cool. Yeah. All right.
Signing off. Happy growing.